joining us today. Thank you. We have one more session that will be next month in our series here about biking and get back on your bike and biking basics. That's a lot of B's, isn't it? And AARP is thrilled to have everybody here. My name is Linda Bowden. I am the AARP Vermont state president and a bike enthusiast. And what I love about AARP are the many different kinds of programs we have to stimulate our older population with programs like cooking, paint and sip, bicycle maintenance, one-day lectures, movies for grown-ups. And you can go to our website at aarp.org/VT. I'll put that in the chat and find out a lot of these programs. And I'll put it in another website too. But today we're really thrilled to be working with Local Motion, and Eliana Fox, who's the program coordinator, is going to kick us off with a wonderful program about maintenance gears, changing tires, and tools for success on your own. So Eliana, take it away.
Thank you, Linda. I'm really happy to be here again with all of you this month. So again, my name's Eliana Fox. I'm the program coordinator at Local Motion. So today we'll be talking some really basic bike maintenance. We did have a professional mechanic consult on the content, so I hope that you'll find his input helpful and all of that. So let's get started. Okay, so my goal for you today is to better understand the parts of your bike, simple ways to see how those parts work and if they're properly adjusted and working properly, and if and when you need to, those issues need to go to a shop, for example. I'll also point you to some do-it-yourself DIY maintenance resources that, I hope after this presentation, you'll really be able to engage with in a meaningful way to be able to work on your own bike. So if you're not familiar, just a quick overview of Zoom. Here's some quick directions. So you're currently muted with this button in the lower left-hand corner, and you can unmute if you're called upon. You can also turn your video on if you'd like. You can also change the layout of what you see. Mostly you're gonna just be seeing my presentation, but if you wanna see everyone's faces, you can do that with the view button in the upper corner there. And then if you have a question, go ahead and please type it in the chat. The chat button is in the middle of your screen right there, and you can type your question in the lower right-hand corner. And so without further ado, let's get started with a quick overview of the different parts of a bike, as well as some the quick ABC check. Okay, so before we jump into the actual maintenance, it's important to remember that a bike is not one thing. It's made up of a bunch of individual parts that make up smaller systems within the bike. So if you think about your braking system, right, that has it's not just brakes. There are levers here on your handlebars. There are brake arms and cables and wires that connect your brake arms to your brake levers. And at the end of those arms, there are pads that actually touch the rim. So that's how I like to think about a bike, is being able to recognize that it's a thing that has a bunch of different parts that make up different systems. And once you're able to recognize and name those different parts of a bike, it will make identifying potential maintenance issues easier for you and for your mechanic if you bring it there to a shop. So we're not going to be talking about every single part of a bike today, just the ones that you can focus on, that checking on your own, cleaning on your own, and understanding the role that they play in making your bike roll or stop or turn. Rather than kind of a 101 course, I hope you'll consider this kind of a prerequisite to bike maintenance, providing you with a really solid base to start building capacity on your own to work on your own bike. Okay, so as a reminder, before you ride every time, make sure your bike is in safe working condition. This is called the ABC Quick Check. And I would say make sure you do this at least a day in advance of your ride, so that if you do identify any safety concerns, you can address those before you head out on your ride. You don't want to be heading out the door and arriving at the trailhead or wherever you're riding to find that your bike is not rideable. So again, the ABC quick check is that quick thing you can do to feel for issues. Air in your tires, brakes that are tight enough, a chain that's not too dry or rusty, and checking your quick release levers, and then one quick check all over. Okay, so with your tire, you can do your thumb test. Your tire should not compress more than 1/2 inch, and if it's too low, pump it up. Air pressure range is written on the side of your tire as it's shown in this photo here. You don't need the maximum PSI. Anywhere in that range is safe for you. So this tire here, for example, says between 90 and 125 PSI. Brakes, both brakes should fit a thumb between your lever and the handlebar. We'll talk a little bit about proper brake adjustment later in this presentation. And when so pull those levers, make sure they're not too close to your handlebars. And when you pull them and try to move your bike, it shouldn't move. Your chain should be rust free. So move your pedals backwards while your bike is sitting on the ground. Your chain should move smoothly. It shouldn't feel like it's catching, and if it's a little dry, go ahead and add some lube to that really quickly. After you add lube, make sure you wipe it down quickly with a rag, because you don't want it to be so wet that it's picking up extra dirt and sand and grime and that sort of thing. Your quick release checks, so those are the quick releases you'll find under your seat post to adjust your seat height and to remove your wheels. Just make sure those are tight. And Connor, our mechanic, has a great rule of thumb that he'll talk about in one of the videos in this presentation. And finally, give it one quick check all over. There shouldn't be any rattles or anything. One thing I like to do to identify potentially loose pieces is lifting up the bike maybe 1 inch off the ground and just dropping it and listening for any rattles. You can also do that by lifting up one end at a time. So looking at the rear, dropping it and listening, lifting up the front, dropping it and listening. Okay. So a few tips about caring for your bike and maintaining your bike. The maintenance you do on your bike ultimately depends on how much or how little you use it and what kind of riding you're doing. Bike maintenance begins with you understanding what kind of riding you want and like to do and how often you do it. For example, if you spend a lot of time riding in wet, muddy conditions, or you are riding many days a week, and you're riding hard and fast for exercise or that sort of thing, you'll need to plan to clean your bike and maintain it a little more frequently. And then secondly, if you're out riding down Vermont's big hills with a bike that has a lot of different gears, so you may have 3 chain rings in the front and 10 gears in the back, you're going to have more parts, which means you're going to have a little more maintenance to do. Third, always store your bike inside whenever possible. Rain, moisture, and dirt cause your parts to wear quicker and cost you more in repairs and service. Fourth, every bike is unique. So the principles of maintenance are kind of the same, but the parts on your specific bike will vary greatly. For example, rim brakes versus disc brakes. We'll talk a little bit. And then with brakes, there are specific subgroups within each of those. So get to know the parts on your specific bike, and that will help you understand how to best maintain it. And then finally, once you've learned the specific parts of your bike, you can start building up the proper tool set for working on it. Don't go out and buy a bunch of generic tools. Do a little research and understand your bike to find out the tools that you need for your bike. With that being said, there are some tools that you probably already have and can do you a lot of good in caring for your bike. So for cleaning purposes, having a rag or an old t-shirt and degreaser for cleaning. So the degreaser pictured here is called Simple Green. You can get that anywhere, Home Depot or Lowe's or a hardware store. But if you don't want to do that, some warm soapy water, like with dish soap, works fine as a degreaser, kind of like getting the kitchen grease off of your dishes. And then you probably have a pump if you're riding regularly, chain lube, and then an old toothbrush is really good for getting cleaning those nooks and crannies like your cassette, your gears, and your chain rings. Some tools you might not have that are pretty universal. So first thing is a multi-tool for tightening bolts that might come loose on your bike. So thinking about adjusting the angle of your seat or adding a bottle cage, having those universal wrenches from that multi-tool are good. Next, a tire lever. If you have tight tires, this is important for unseating and reseating your tires after changing a flat or changing tires between seasons. Always use a plastic lever like the one pictured here over a metal one. Metal levers can scratch the rim of your wheel and damage your tire. Plastic works and is way more gentle on those parts. And we'll talk a little bit about tire and wheel removal in a bit. And then of course, the patch kit is crucial for flat fixes, especially on the road. And we'll go over that in a little bit as well. Okay, so I broke this down into things that I think you should be checking semi-annually, every couple of months. So we know that a bike has many parts, and these are a few parts and systems that you can check on your own with the tools that you already have. Okay.
No matter how often or where you ride your bike, the drivetrain is going to get dirty. It's probably the dirtiest part of your bike and may need the most frequent cleaning attention. This is a bicycle drivetrain. It's like the transmission of your bike and consists of front chain rings, a rear derailleur, the cassette, and the chain itself. Any grit caught in your drivetrain is going to wear down parts prematurely because the grime on your chain acts like sandpaper. So even a quick and basic cleaning will add years of life to your bike. You'll need a few things before you get started. Several old rags, good for brush, a bottle of bio-degreaser, your favorite chain lubricant, and a chain cleaning device may be helpful as well. The ground and parts are easy to get. This will make the work a lot more comfortable. Using a rag and some bio-degreaser. This is a simple method that can be used on chains that don't have a ton of built-up grime. For a really dirty chain, a chain cleaning device may be your best bet. This way is simple, more thorough, and a lot less messy. To get the grit off chain rings and the cassette, the quickest way is to scrub with a brush and bio-degreaser while pedaling. Keep in mind, an old toothbrush can be used as well. In many cases, this may be enough, but if there's a lot of built-up grime, use rags to wipe away any remaining dirt and to floss in between the gears. After the degreaser has dried, it's time to lube the chain. Apply drops of the lube slowly onto the chain, getting some on each link. Be sure to wipe off any excess lubricant so it doesn't attract more dirt.
Okay. So that was just a quick overview of how to maintain your drivetrain, keeping it clean. And that really adds longevity to a part of your bike that gets dinged up pretty quickly because it's so exposed. So things to look for: built up grease and grime, which is going to be like black, sand and dirt, rust, frayed and rusty cables. So you'll see that there are cables that connect your shifter from that's on your handlebars to the derailleur that actually moves your gears. And then on your cassette, look for kind of dull or warped gear teeth on there. That may be a sign that they're kind of worn. And then listen for louder than usual grinding noise. That usually means that your chain is dry, dirty, and needs some attention. Skipping might be an indicator of worn out gear and chain. Squeaking, it might be because it's kind of wet. So just, listen and look for those things on your bike. Oops.
No matter how often.
Sorry. Okay, so I wanted to talk a little bit about the different kinds of drivetrain setups and what that means for maintenance. So remember how I said that more parts equals more maintenance? this is kind of what I'm talking about. If your drivetrain has gears in the back and in the front, chain rings in the front, that means you're going to have two sets of everything. So you have a derailleur here in the front and a derailleur in the back. And that means you're going to have two sets of cables and two sets of shifters. So that kind of setup is really good for going up and down really big hills, but just be aware that there are more parts, so it may take a little longer to maintain, clean that drivetrain. This next setup is a 1x9, so this is maybe a little more common for commuter style riding. It's kind of a common setup on like mountain bikes. And this has one set of everything. So there's only a rear derailleur. So there's one shifter, one set of shifting cables. So still have to clean it and maintain it, but it might be a little simpler than if you have a 3x10, right? And then lastly, we have a single speed setup. So there are no gears on this bike, just a single cog in the back and a chain, which means all you have to do is make sure that chain and chain ring stays clean. So it's a lot less intense in that sort of thing. And I wanted to talk a little review from our last presentation, just to review what those different setups mean for going on hills. And we'll talk mostly, this is mostly referring to that 3x10 setup. So using your left-hand shifter moves the chain on the front chain rings. And so that's good for bigger changes. So if you're approaching a steep hill, that's what you're looking for. Whereas using your right hand makes more precise changes, smaller changes. This is how you make smaller refinements to find the perfect gear choice. When you're out for a ride, anticipate the terrain. So shift right before you start climbing, not halfway up when you're slowly when you're rapidly slowing down, right? And are putting a lot of pressure on the pedals. And if you hear a lot of grinding, that can be a sign that you're shifting while applying too much pressure. So that'd be like shifting on a hill. And excessive grinding is another thing that wears out that drivetrain more quickly. When in doubt, just always use an easier gear, pedal in an easier gear, but at a higher cadence. Okay. So now Connor is going to talk a little bit about proper brake adjustment.
Hi everyone, I want to tell you a little bit about how to tell if your brakes
Ooh, sorry.
well adjusted. So this will, in principle, work between any kind of brake that you might have. So right now we're looking at a drop bar or a road bike type setup. So you have these curly bars, you have these types of brake levers. But again, these principles transfer to all brakes. So the first thing when I'm testing out brakes on a bike, I'm going to pull the lever, much like you probably do before going out on a ride. And what I'm feeling for is how far the lever actually pulls before the brake pads are locked up on the rim. So with this, I've got a little bit of separation between the brake lever and the handlebar, which is good because that means that I'm not bottoming out on the handlebar and still having, brake travel that I wish that I had. So if I was going down a big hill, I still have some room there that I can keep pulling if I really need to stop. You don't want your lever to be hitting the bars because that's an unsafe situation to have. And also inversely, you don't want the levers to be so tight that you can barely get any pull out of them, because that means that you're going to be putting a lot of work on your hands. And also the brakes are mechanically at a disadvantage at that point if you only pull, half an inch or something like that. So there is a bandwidth that you're looking for. And within that bandwidth, there's personal preference. So if you have smaller hands, having your brakes set up a little bit lighter might be better. And if you have bigger hands, having them out here where they stop might be a little bit better for you. Now, moving down to the caliper, that's this part of the brake. The actual part of the brake that's by the wheel is called the caliper. You have your brake pads. These are actually what grip the rim themselves. And so when I'm looking at the caliper and I want to gauge how well the brakes are adjusted, I'm pulling the lever and I'm just seeing how quickly the brake pads return. And I'm making sure that they're returning evenly. I don't want to see one pad sticking closer to the rim and one pad shooting way back. That would be an improper adjusted return spring. There are springs in this caliper that push the arms away from the rim. And if those aren't doing their job properly, then the pads will usually drag on the rim and wear down faster. They'll cause you more drag, and it's just not how it should be set up. Otherwise, with your brake feel, you just want to make sure that it feels smooth, that there's no kinks in any of the housing, that there's no rust or any kind of fraying going on your cable housing down here. And if your brake pads are exposed like they are here, you just want to make sure that you actually have some sort of material left on the pads themselves. Beyond that, if you want to get a little bit closer in on the caliper, you can pull the lever and just make sure that your pads are contacting the rim themselves. Sometimes as they wear, they'll drop below the rim braking surface, which is this silver bit, or they'll start biting up into your tire and wearing out your tire. So just give the lever a pull and hold it, and just make sure where the pads sit on the rim is on this brake surface.
Okay. So just to review kind of what Connor said, what you're looking for when you're checking your brakes, how tight your levers are, the return of the brake arm or the caliper while you're pulling the lever, where the brake pad actually is meeting the part of your wheel. So it should be in contact with the rim. And you're looking to make sure the cables that are connecting your lever with the actual braking system, the calipers, those cables are not frayed or rusty. And if you're looking for squeak, or if you hear any squeaking with it, that probably means that your brake pads and rims might be dirty. So you can clean those with some rubbing alcohol. And if your brakes are feeling too loose or too tight, you can make minor adjustments using what's called a barrel adjuster. It's just a little screw type mechanism on the cable between the lever that you can kind of adjust for tightness. Oops. So I'm not going to make you watch this whole video. I just wanted to show the example because it is a little bit different with disc brakes. Again, the mechanism is the same. It's still a brake, but instead of the brake pad being placed on the rim, it contacts the rotor, the metal disc on the wheel itself. So just so you can see how that mechanism works, you're looking for the same kind of things happening, just in a different place on the bike. Okay. So the next thing we wanted to talk to you about is our bearings. So these are small steel balls that run around in tracks, and they're found in a bunch of different parts on your bike. The bottom bracket, which is where your cranks are, your headsets, basically anything that moves and connects pieces of your bike together will have some kind of bearing in it. And it allows for you to turn your handlebars, spin your wheels, pedal your pedals. As you ride, bearings can go loose or get dirty. And when bearings start to wear, they damage those internal tracks, which will eventually wear out the whole hub. So that hub that you're pictured there, for example, is what your spokes come out of and connect your spokes to the rim of your tire. So you don't want that to wear, because then your whole wheel is going to start to feel flimsy. So today I'll talk about the most important, easily wearable ones that you can check. And every bike has at least 4 sets of bearings. They're not really easily maintained on your own, but they're easy to check on your own. And so that's why I wanted to talk about them. And here are a few ways that you can check for bearings in various places. So in your headset, which is the front part of your bike, you can use your index finger on your headset where it meets the stem, the handlebars, or where it meets the fork. So start by pinching your front brake, rock the bike back and forth, and feel for any knocking in that front part of your bike. Think about those tiny steel balls knocking against the frame of your bike, or that track that they're in. That's kind of what you're feeling for in your fingers when you're doing that. Another way to notice if your headset bearings are adjusted incorrectly is the tightness of your turning. So if you're turning your handlebars and you're feeling a more than normal kind of resistance in there, or a grinding, that may be a sign that your bearings are too tight also in your headset in that front part of your bike. So your bottom bracket, which is where your cranks, pedal cranks go into your bike. So check that by holding the pedals at noon and 6, as Connor's done pictured here, and kind of rock them back and forth. And again, you want to feel for that knocking, swaying feeling. So feeling what those steel balls might be doing in the track that they're running in. And then finally, you have bearings in both of your wheel hubs, so your front and back. So to check this, place one hand on top of your wheel and the other holding the frame steady. Try rocking the wheel back and forth. If you feel, again, any sort of, it's going to be really slight knocking, that's a sign that your hub bearings may be worn. And when they're really worn, sometimes the whole wheel kind of tilt out of place because, as I said, the bearings get worn, the hub starts to wear, and those spokes that connect the hub to your rim, they kind of get flimsy. And so this can prevent your whole wheel from rolling over smoothly. Okay, so next we're going to talk a bit about tires, tubes, and flat fixes. So there are 5 basic steps to fixing a flat tire, but in my opinion, to me, there's a process for each of those steps. So those are kind of what I'm going to go over today. And hopefully with this, we'll also provide you the skills you need to, say, change out your tires. If you're changing them just for seasonal purposes, like a thicker one in the winter or studded ones in the winter, for example. So first, we need to understand there are different types of tubes and accordingly different types of pumps to pump them up. Not different pumps, but different pump heads, right? So the 2 most common ones are called Schrader and Presta valves. So Presta valves are the narrower ones. They're more common on thinner wheels, road style bikes. And so before you can pump them up, you have to unscrew this little cap at the top. And if you're deflating your tire before changing it, you just unscrew it and press down on that little valve, and that will deflate it. That will let the air out. And at the same time, you need that thing unscrewed if you're pumping it back up as well. This also comes with a lock ring, which is this middle part here. That doesn't have anything to do with inflation of the tire or of the tube itself. That just holds the tube in place in your rim, in your tire, while you're biking so that it doesn't move around. And then Schrader valves, which is the one all the way on your right side of your screen. Those are bigger and they're common on wider tubes and tires. To deflate, you have to just press down that middle valve core to do this. You can kind of just put the pump on there and press down. Alternatively, you can just use something small like a key just to press that down to get the air out. And so it's important to know how to deflate your tires or your tubes in order to change out your tires, or if you need to get the rest of their air out before fixing a flat. Okay, so whether you're replacing a tube entirely, patching the inner tube with a patch kit, or changing out your tires seasonally, removing the entire wheel from your bike and then being able to put it back on are key skills that you need to be able to have. And so I'm gonna just show you this video of Connor doing that for you.
Hi, I wanted to show you how to get your rear wheel out of the bike if you were out on the road or trail and you got a flat tire, or for whatever reason you need to pull the rear wheel off the bike. So the first thing you're going to do is if you have a rim brake like this, not a disc brake down here, if you have a rim brake, you're going to need to disengage the brake most often to get the wheel past the brake pads. So with this style of brake, you're pulling the arms together and getting the cable to come out. You'll have to figure out what kind of brake you have and how it comes out, but generally the principle is the same. And then you come down here to your quick release, or if you have a bolt-on axle, you're going to need to carry a wrench with you, but in this case, it's a quick release. I'm going to flip the lever open, and I'm going to spin that around until it is loose enough to get the wheel to drop out nicely. Set that off to the side. now you've done whatever you need to do to the wheel, you fixed your flat, and now you're looking at this down here. So you have your chain kind of dangling, your derailleur, your rear derailleur is here. Your chain might have fallen off the front chain rings up here. So I would probably put the chain back on the chain ring that you were on before you took the wheel out. This just makes the installation a little bit easier. Once you have the wheel in, your chain isn't going to be binding up. And then, so right now you have two kind of lines of chains. You have this upper side and you have this lower side. And a lot of people get confused where to put the cassette in relation to all of this. And so what I am going to tell you to do is pick up the top one, the one that's facing you, and put your cassette, which is this cluster of gears, on to the lower chain. And then aim for the dropouts. So now I can pick up the derailleur. You can actually move this cage to make it easier. So you see how when I pick up the cage, I'm literally just pulling it up. It almost rolls the wheel right in all by itself. And now I'm just going to give it a little tap, make sure that everything is seated. I'm just looking to make sure that this wheel is nice and aligned in the frame itself. You don't want to have it cockeyed in any way. You want to see it between the brakes nice and even, and you want to make sure that the axle is seated in the dropouts. So I'm looking around, everything looks nice and seated. I'm just going to screw my quick release together. And the proper tension, if you want to come around here on the lever, so you should be testing to see if you have proper tension. You don't want this lever to be too loose. And usually the rule of thumb is that you need to brace your hand against some part of the frame in order to close it. And that feels good and tight to me. Your bike to the ground. And now before you get on it, you just want to make sure that the chain is properly seated on the cassette. So you can do that in a number of different ways. You can just pick up the back end and just give it a spin. Sometimes the chain will kind of jump around and settle back into the gear that you were in. And the last thing you want to do is just hook your brakes back up. Get a nice pull on the lever to kind of reset the whole brake action. And also give the wheel a little spin. Make sure that everything is seated nice and straight. And you should be good to go.
Okay, so that was a really quick how to remove your wheel and how to replace it especially while you're out on the road. It's good to see how to replace your wheel when it's flipped over. So don't be afraid of those gears. A bike is not a super delicate creature usually. So one thing that Connor forgot to mention that I put on this slide is that you should shift your gear into the hardest gear before removing your rear wheel. So that's the smallest cog, and it's the one that's going to be on the outermost part of your wheel. It just makes it easier for taking out the wheel and putting it back in. Okay. So after you've removed your wheel from your bike frame, you'll need to deflate the inner tube, which we talked about a couple of slides ago. And if you're fixing a flat, the tube may be deflated enough. But after that, you'll need to unseat the tire, which means getting the edge of the tire out from under the rim. You can do this by hand, but using a plastic lever will provide you a little more leverage. And you can see the little animation there is how you kind of unseat a tire. So pushing it towards one side, getting that lever under and kind of moving it around. And then after that, you can start removing the tube. And once you've removed the tube, identify the cause of the flat by pumping up the tube and holding it up to your ear and listening for a hiss of air coming out. You'll want to check all the parts of your wheel for the cause of the flat. Check the tube for and the valve where you would pump it up, the rim for debris, the tire itself may have glass caught in it. So just check all those different parts that make up the wheel. Okay, so how do you know whether you should replace or patch your tube? You're going to need to completely replace it when the tube damage is extensive. So you have a hole that's too big for a patch to cover. A patch job fails to hold, so that would be when you're testing your tube before you're putting it back in your wheel, and the patch is not holding. And then finally, there's tube valve damage. You can't really put a patch on that just because of the location. Okay, and this video is going to show you quickly how to patch a tube.
Knowing how to patch your tube will save you time, money, and having to walk your bike home. You'll need a patch kit, which will include rubber cement, patches, sandpaper or a scraper, a marker, and a pump. The first step is to find the leak. Pump some air into the tube and hold it up to your ear to see if you can hear a hiss. If you can't locate the leak, you may have to submerge the tube in some water until you see bubbles escaping. Once you find the leak, mark the hole so you don't lose it. Once you've got a dry, deflated tube, rough up the area around the puncture. This helps the glue stick better. Next, dab a small amount of glue on the hole and spread it around. Make sure there's enough glue to go to the edges of the patch. The glue needs to set for a few minutes, so now's a great time to check your bike tire for any thorns or burrs that might have caused the flat. After a few minutes, the glue should be tacky and ready for your patch. Take the foil off the back of the patch and press the patch onto the glue. Make sure to press out any air that might be caught under the patch. Wait for a few minutes to let the patch set, then carefully roll the plastic back. It's a good idea to add some air to the tube and test the patch underwater.
Okay. So that's really quickly how you patch a damaged tube. And one caveat that I want to note is that sometimes that patch glue, that rubber cement that she mentioned, can dry up even if it's new or unopened. So probably a good rule of thumb is to make sure in your patch kit you're replacing your glue once a year. I was out on a bike ride and I got a flat, and the person I was riding with, his patch kit, his glue had also dried up. So it happens. Just make sure to check your patch kit every once in a while to make sure that your glue is still working.
Knowing how to patch your tube will save you time, money.
Okay. So, after you've patched your tube, in order to put the tube and tire back together, so you'll push your tube valve through the hole in the rim, push the tire tube back under your tire, roll the tire back onto the rim, kind of like the reverse of what you do unseating the tire. So you're reseating the tire, and you'll use the heel of your hand to kind of roll the tire back onto the rim. And finally, just make sure when that happens, check to make sure that the tube isn't poking outside of the tire, and then you'll be able to pump it up and fully reseat the tire onto the rim. So that's kind of all of the tire and tube stuff for now. In terms of an annual overhaul, it's always good to have a professional set of eyes on your bike once a year. Mechanics will look for many of the issues we talked about today in a standard tune-up and may replace or re-grease items like your bearings. They may replace your brake pads and your cables and your shifting cables. But understand that the better you take care of cleaning these parts and checking these parts on your own, the longer they'll last, and you will need to have them replaced way less frequently. So finally, I wanted to show you a couple of resources that I use, that Connor uses, kind of do-it-yourself maintenance resources. So I shared a few videos from the REI expert blog. I found those videos really helpful, and the written piece is really accessible. You may also like the Park Tool Repair blog, which is shown in this graphic to your right. You can look up potential issues and their fixes using an actual diagram of a bike with parts, which will also help you learn the different parts of your bike. So it's kind of a really good way to get started. Okay. So that concludes the maintenance part of our presentation. Next, I wanted to just share our final workshop in September. We'll share different stories and experiences of our bike rides. We'll talk a little bit about e-bikes, and we'll talk a little bit about fall and winter prep. And I hope that the tire portion of this video gives you a nice prerequisite to thinking about, how do I change my tire if I'm riding around the snow or the rain or what have you. So you have kind of a baseline to be able to do that now that you understand how to remove a tire and replace a tire. We've got a couple of events upcoming. All summer, we've had our Snow Farm Vineyard Concert Series. Locomotion has sponsored a couple of concerts there. It's in South Hero, right at the top of the causeway. An event that we're partnering on is in Burlington. Then there's a new North End Open Streets event being planned for September. That'll be 1 to 5. There are going to be vendors, kids activities, and we'll be there handing out free bike lights and resources and what have you. And then finally, the bike challenge is ongoing, but I really wanted to highlight the Tour de Farms. And as you know, you get a 5% discount as an AARP member. It's a 30-mile route. And I did check the website today. I realized that there's a 400 rider limit, so you definitely want to sign up early to be guaranteed a spot for that. All right. Does anyone have any questions for me?
So I'm seeing a question here from Ginny, and she was asking, do you recommend the puncture-proof tires?
Like the tubeless ones?
Yeah, there are some other tires. Maybe, Ginny, do you want to unmute yourself and ask that question?
Sorry. Yeah, I just see these ads for puncture proof or puncture resistant tires. So for those of us who are really novice at bike riding and are concerned about especially flats on the back tire where it seems like it's so much more complicated, I was just wondering if puncture proof tires are recommended.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I want to address a couple of things that you brought up. So as you saw in the video that Connor did, removing your rear wheel is not as complicated as you think. It's really just shifting into your lowest or your highest gear, the smallest cog, and taking it out as you would a front tire. Like, you don't have to worry about messing up your gears. It's, like I said, it's not super delicate. But to answer your question about tubeless tires, just my personal experience is that, not that I've used them, but they are more complicated to kind of get on and off. You have to seed them. We talked about seeding a little bit, using liquid cement. That process of getting the tire on and making sure it's on properly is a little more complicated. For me as also a novice maintenance person, I understand the steps for fixing a flat with a tube. I don't really know how you would reseat a tubeless tire necessarily. However, you can, if you get a flat tire with a tubeless tire, you can also use a tube in that. So say your actual tire itself gets a slit in it, you can fix it by just putting a tube back in. So that's my answer based on my experiences with them. Connor just got here. If anyone wants to, if you would like his input, the mechanic in the video. So if you want, he can answer.
Well, a follow-up question to that is, you talked about the patches drying out. How long do tires last? Do they dry out? The tubes, how long do they last? Do they dry out?
Do tubes dry out? Come here, just come.
So with tires, hi everyone. So are you talking about the tires themselves or the tubes inside?
The tubes inside.
Yeah, so typically what I've seen is tires or bikes in general that have been left in the hot sun, it'll kind of degrade the rubber, and usually the tubes and the tires themselves will degrade together. So what will happen is the rubber already has little microscopic holes, and that's why you have to keep pumping up your tires at set intervals anyway, and the sun and time exacerbates those problems faster. So
To answer that, yes, you will have to replace tubes that are excessively old, and I'm talking years. Not because they get a puncture or a pinch flat, but because they're losing too much air because the rubber itself has degraded. And especially with tires, it's important to check for dry cracking, a mechanic will call it. So you'll see hairline cracks, especially along the sidewall of the tire, if the tube hasn't been inflated properly and the bike has been left to sit. So that tire will deflate and then it'll sit on the ground and squash down, and that'll put a lot of stress on the sidewall of the tire. And if you then ride it, that'll degrade the tire itself, riding it for prolonged periods underinflated. And to the person that asked the question about the puncture resistant or puncture proof tires, the thing that you might also want to pay attention to, because a common thing to do in the winter is to put a beefier tire, so a more puncture resistant tire on. What they're talking about there is a tire it's heavier because it has extra layers of protection in the rubber. From the manufacturer, they bake in typically layers of like Kevlar that will make the tire more rigid, so the ride feel along the road will be more rough, but it will protect you better from glass, nails, sharp objects. No tire is puncture proof though. You will eventually get some kind of problem. So the best rule of thumb is to keep your tires inflated and keep checking them. And certainly avoid the tubes that have the goo layer in. I think they're more of an old school thing. There were tubes that you could actually buy that had like goo sealant, because that was the idea, was that it would fill the hole after you punctured, but they never usually work. So if you get a lot of flats, maybe look at a stronger tire. But if you don't typically get flats, running a lighter tire with less protection gives you a better ride. But that's all I would say.
Okay. Do you want to hang around for 10 minutes?
I'd love to hang around.
Okay. So lucky for you all, Connor is going to hang around for the last 10 minutes for our questions. So anything else we have here?
Just a reminder that the program that you do next month, Eliana, is going to include getting ready for winter. So the kinds of things that you can do, incorporating some of the tips that Connor has given us already with regards to, what kinds of tires. I'm not sure if you would have a different tube or not, but at least tires that you would have, and what the distance is between that your bike can cater to larger tires will be probably something else that Locomotion will speak to with regards to that. And also just about cleaning and that kind of thing, because we do have nasty things put on the road to help us from slipping and sliding. But as Burlington is increasing their protected bike lanes, they are doing a better job of cleaning those off. So I always cheer when I hear the street sweepers going down the road in the neighborhoods. Any other questions? You folks are welcome, because we have a few number of people here. If you've got a question, Payal, you look like you've got a question. Unmute yourself and be sure and ask. Go ahead.
Yeah, my question is, and it's probably obvious, but if a bike has been in a barn for a couple of years, would you suggest that probably I should have a professional look at it before I try to do anything with it? What would be your recommendation?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it depends on what your comfort level is. What I've seen typically are bikes that have been in barns. They might look really dusty, but when you wipe that dust off, it's actually been really protected quite well. But I think the typical things that need to be replaced from that kind of prolonged storage are, like we said, tires, brake pads do experience cracking. Any kind of rubber bit on the bike will get dried out and crack. Not too much in New England, just because of the humidity that we have up here. So it tends to preserve rubber bits, but at bare minimum, I would make sure that the tires have decent health, and you can feel it. Like, you can squeeze the tire tread if it's a knobby tire, like a mountain bike tire. If it feels hard to you, then it's probably worth replacing. I mean, tires are very cheap, and they are your one contact point with the ground. So it really gives you the best, bang for your buck to upgrade or replace a tire, because it'll change the whole feel of the ride. And brake pads just being the immediate safety concern. and those being rubber stored for a long time could wear out. So those would be the two major things that I would check. And if you're comfortable with it, you know, just clean it off like a hose with dish detergent, something like that. And if the brakes are working, you know, you've done your ABC check, then maybe take it for a little loop around your driveway. If everything feels good, it sounds okay, then it might be okay just to ride. But if you're not comfortable or you're not sure about all the systems on the bike, certainly bring it into a bike shop, and they'll typically do like you could ask them not for a tune-up, but just, can you do a safety check on this? And what we used to do would be like a $15 kind of, you know, 30-minute check over of all the major systems. And that'll give you an idea of like the wear of the bike, and if the chain needs to be replaced, if the gears are okay, the cables, things like that.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Excellent. Are there any other questions? Please feel free to unmute yourself. We have two wonderful folks here that are very knowledgeable about bikes, so now's the time to do it.
So I'll ask another question. E-bikes, do they change the way you maintain a bike? Are the basic replacements of tires and chain cleaning and all that the same?
Yeah, that's in
Yeah.
your wheelhouse, Eliana.
I would say for the most part, those things we went over are similar. What tends to happen with some e-bikes is because they are heavier, the tires might wear out, like go bald quicker. And that's just because it's a heavier bike. And the other thing that tends to happen is that drivetrain can, like the hardest gear tends to wear really fast because people find that it's really easy to pedal with even one level of assist. And so they're always using their hardest gear because it feels easy to pedal. And so that one gear tends to get worn out very quickly. And so those are kind of rider dependent, I guess, that thing with your drivetrain, but the cleaning is definitely the same. So you want to keep that drivetrain clean for sure, making sure there's no grit and dirt and grease in there. And it's almost even more important on an e-bike because the motors are close to that drivetrain system, and the battery can be close to that system, and you don't want to get dirt and grime in those parts, especially because then you're looking at the battery not working properly. So yeah, that same cleaning process I would say is just important. And then with the brakes, they're the same brakes you have on a regular bike, although every e-bike is going to have disc brakes, right? We talked about a little bit between the difference between rim brakes and disc brakes. Disc brakes are a little more powerful, and the maintenance is slightly different because of where they're located on your bike, like we talked about. But they still have brake pads. They still have cables and housing and those brake arms that squeeze the rotor. So for the most part, yes, the maintenance is pretty similar. I hope that answers your question well enough.
Yeah, great question, Jenny. Go ahead.
It does, and it sounds like you have experience with e-bikes. So I'm wondering, do they really work well in Vermont with all these hills? And how far will an e-bike take you on the battery alone if you are in trouble and just can't pedal any longer?
So it depends on the kind of, okay, so there are two questions there. So I'll start with the hills and stuff. So one reason a lot of Vermonters do get e-bikes is to overcome those hills, right? So even if you're in Burlington and you need to commute to work, getting up and down the hills are challenging here. And having the electric assist allows you to get up the hill without having to sweat, you know? So that's a huge thing. And it's a huge, I would say, benefit that e-bikes provide. They really make the hills accessible and easy. So the second part of your question in terms of range, so the range of an e-bike battery will really depend on how much assistance you're using. So e-bikes will have a pedal assist between 1 and 5. Some, not all e-bikes have throttles. So that's what a throttle will carry you right without having to pedal at all. That wears down the battery really, really quickly, probably within 30 minutes, I would say. If you're just riding with the throttle and not pedaling at all. If you're just using the pedal assist, say you're using level 1 or level 2, and you're continuing to pedal, you're probably looking at a range of 20 miles, give or take, but that range is also dependent on the hills, the weight of the cargo. So if you have any stuff that you're carrying, like in a pannier bag, that is going to wear the battery. But a very conservative estimate, if you're riding a regular e-bike, using level 1, level 2, level 3 pedal assist, you're probably going to get 20-25 miles conservatively, right? So it's probably more than that, but that's the estimate that I give people because I don't like to over promise.
So, and just a plug for our next program, Eliana's going to talk a little bit more about e-bikes next month, and that will be September 9, which is the second Thursday in the month. That will be our last program. And what we encourage you folks to do is to think about some of the rides that you've taken and write down in a journal or a piece of paper or in notes in your computer, but just share, be ready to share some of those great rides that you have. We've got a great little community going on here, and it'd be fun to find out where folks have gone and what kinds of things they've seen and how they planned their route and what kinds of equipment they may have taken along with them to extend their ride, those sorts of things. So consider that, and we'll be talking about e-bikes. And Eliana, what was the other thing that we were going to, getting your bike ready for winter, right? So those three things will be covered. Eliana will be covering those on the 9th of September. So sign up for that. Go to that website that I mentioned, aarp.org/VT, and look at the events, and you'll see September 9 is already up there. I've already signed up for it. And you can get all the different notices that say that we're having the program, and join us again like you did this morning. Any other quick questions? Because we're running out of time. So anything more before we go? We will be posting this on our YouTube website, which will give you information about a little later in an email. So, all right, I'm not saying anything. Thank you so much, Connor and Eliana. It was a pleasure working with both of you. AARP Vermont loves that we have this wonderful partnership with you. And thank you to all of the participants. It makes it so much fun when you ask your questions and join. And we'll see you out there on the bike path. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.